Welcome to the Bible Explained podcast, faithful listeners. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Chronicles chapter 11 and talking about how David becomes the next king of Israel and why the Israelites didn't initially want David as their king. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. So I hope you guys are staying cool in this heat wave we're having. Which is affecting, I think, most of America right now. Everywhere is pretty hot, including my location, but actually this is not all that abnormal for where I live. We have very horrible winters in my area, and we also get extremely hot summers. But actually, even though we're supposedly going through a heat wave right now, it's not as hot as some of the years that I remember. I remember not too long ago it getting up into the high 90s with a lot of humidity. Right now, it's about in the 80s with high humidity. So not really comfortable to sit outside, but not absolutely unbearable. In fact, after I'm done recording this episode, I think I'm going to go out and mow my lawn. My husband and I actually fight over who gets to mow the lawn because we both really enjoy the riding mower. Anyway, I am going off on tangents. Let's go ahead and read 1 Chronicles 11, 1 through 9. Grab your cup of coffee this morning because I have mine right here with me and I'd love to share one with you. And if you're looking for a new coffee brand that does something really good with your money, you should check out 7 Weeks Coffee because they are the coffee brand that supports life in the womb. They have been able to raise in the 3 years that they've been off the ground over $1 million for pregnancy centers across the U.S. So they support a really good cause and they make very, very good coffee. I actually very much enjoy their coffee and am going to order a bag now that I am able to drink coffee once again. And you guys should check out 7 Weeks Coffee as well. If you use my link, which is in the description, 10% of your purchase will go towards a pregnancy center in the U.S. and another 15% will benefit this ministry. Let's read 1 Chronicles 11, 1 through 9. I'll be reading from the WEB as usual. Then all Israel gathered themselves to David to Hebron, saying, "Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. In times past, even when Saul was king, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. Yahweh your God said to you, 'You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over my people Israel.' So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and David made a covenant with them in Hebron before Yahweh. They anointed David king over Israel, according to Yahweh's word by Samuel. David and all of Israel went to Jerusalem, also called Jebus, and the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, were there. The inhabitants of Jebus said to David, 'You will not come in here.' Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion. The same is David's city. David had said, 'Whoever strikes the Jebusites first shall be chief and captain.' Joab the son of Zeruiah went up first and was made chief. David lived in the stronghold, therefore they called it David's city. He built the city all around, from Millo even around, and Joab repaired the rest of the city. David grew greater and greater, for Yahweh of armies was with him." In the last chapter, we talked about how King Saul died. King Saul was the first king of Israel, but he was not a good king, and so God took the throne away from Saul and decided to give it to David. But even after Saul died, there was actually a very long period of time where Israel could not decide who they wanted their next king to be. The tribe of Judah, where David was from, decided to go with David. And the rest of Israel decided to go with Ishbosheth, who was Saul's last remaining legitimate son. So already you can start seeing the divide between Israel and Judah, well before the split off that happened between those two nations. So David, who is partially the king, he is the king of Judah, is living down in Hebron. And then Ishbosheth, who is the king of Israel, is up somewhere in Israel. So Ishbosheth and David were fighting for a very long period of time. I believe it was 8 years, actually. But the chronicler does not mention that period of time where David and Ishbosheth were fighting. Instead, he jumps straight to when David becomes the next king of Israel, whereas the author of 2 Samuel documents all of the time that took place between the death of Saul and the time that David became king. And if you're curious about reading all of that, that is in 2 Samuel chapter 3 and 4. But to give a quick rundown of what happens in those two chapters, David and Ishbosheth are fighting. Ishbosheth has a commander named Abner who gets into this big fight with Ishbosheth over a concubine. Because Ishbosheth accused Abner of sleeping with a concubine. Abner gets super angry about all of this and decides to defect to David. David accepts him very happily, but Joab, who is David's cousin and also one of David's high-ranking military officials, hates Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother during all of the fights that were happening between Ishbosheth and David. So Joab decides to kill Abner. And after Abner's death, Ishbosheth weakens significantly because Abner was his commander-in-chief, basically. So Ishbosheth doesn't have anybody leading his army anymore. So that causes Israel, who is behind Ishbosheth, to have this huge uproar. And everybody is scared now that David is going to come up to Israel and try to kill everybody. So these two men who worked for Ishbosheth decided that they were going to also defect to David's side, but they were going to bring David a gift, which was the head of Ishbosheth. So they go into Ishbosheth's room while he's asleep, they kill him and cut off his head and bring his head to David. David gets extremely angry about this because of how dirty it was to kill a man like that. He tells the two men, he's like, "You killed a man in his bed while he was sleeping." So David actually kills the two men that killed Ishbosheth. And so now we get to 1 Chronicles 11. It says in verse 1, "All Israel gathered themselves to David to Hebron, saying, 'Behold, we are your bone and your flesh.'" So Israel has finally come to their senses and decided that David should be their king because King Saul and their king Ishbosheth had failed. So the next best choice was David, who already was ruling down in Judah. And here's what they say to David. They're like, "Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. In times past, even when Saul was king, it was you who led out and brought in Israel." In other words, they're saying to David, let's let bygones be bygones. You know, back in the days when Saul was still our king, you were the one who was going and defeating the Philistines for us. You were very mighty. Even though we're not Judites, we still are related because we're all Israelites here. And then they say to him, "Yahweh your God did say to you, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over my people Israel." So what's really funny about that is that all of Israel had known that David was supposed to be king. They knew because they understood the prophecy of Samuel, but yet they didn't really want Samuel's prophecy because they didn't even choose David as their next king. They chose the house of Saul. Now you might be wondering though, why did the Israelites not want David as their king? Because the Israelites even say that David was a mighty man, that they knew that David was supposed to be the next king. So why did they not want David as their king? Well, I think there's actually two reasons for this. I think the first reason is because many of them were loyal to Saul. You know, Saul had done some very good things as king when he first became king. He kind of fell off the deep end towards the end of his life. But toward the beginning, he had a lot of military achievements and accomplishments that I'm sure people remembered and were loyal to Saul because of that. And also they believed in a monarchy that the son should become the next king. So they were loyal, in a sense, to Saul and wanted to maintain that tradition that all of the other nations had, where a monarch's son becomes the next king. So I believe that's the first reason why they didn't initially choose David. But I think the second reason was because David had actually gone and worked for the Philistines for a short period of time. This all happened in 1 Samuel 27. And the Israelites absolutely hated the Philistines because of the trouble that the Philistines constantly caused them. So the Israelites and the Philistines were warring against each other. They hated each other. So the fact that David went and worked for them for a short period of time probably made them believe that David was a traitor to Israel. Now, granted, David never should have gone and done that. There is no reason for him to do that other than his own fear. He should have remained in Israel the whole time. And it's very possible that if he would have remained in Israel, his path to kingship after Saul died might not have been as difficult, because then the Israelites wouldn't have considered David an enemy and a traitor of Israel. And at this point, if you haven't heard the story, you might be wondering, why did David go to Philistia in the first place? Well, because he was scared of Saul. So King Saul hated David. Now, David actually liked King Saul because Saul was his father-in-law and David was very loyal to the king, worked for the king, appreciated the king. But Saul hated David because he considered David a threat to his reign. So Saul starts targeting David, chasing him all over Israel and trying to kill him. So David was a fugitive in his own country for a very, very long period of time, possibly a decade or longer. So eventually, towards the end of all of this, David is getting so frustrated. So here's what 1 Samuel 27 says. David said in his heart, I will now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape into the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me no more in all the borders of Israel. So I will escape out of his hand. David arose and passed over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish the son of Moach, king of Gath. David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, and every man with his household, even David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife. Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, so he stopped looking for him. And if you jump to the next chapter, 1 Samuel 28, 1 and 2, it says, in those days, the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. Achish said to David, know assuredly that you will go out with me in the army, you and your men. David said to Achish, therefore you will know what your servants can do. Achish said to David, therefore I will make you my bodyguard forever. So Achish, the king of the Philistines, actually really liked David. Even though David had killed many Philistines several years prior to this, Achish actually really appreciated and liked David and hoped to make David his bodyguard. But unfortunately, it's very clear here that David was willing to go to war with the Philistines. Now, we don't know exactly why, because it's not stated what David's motivation was. It could be that David was sick and tired of Saul and truly wanted to go out and kill Saul. Could be that he was sick and tired of Israel, who he felt had stabbed him in the back. Could have been that he was going out to war with the Philistines so that he could turn around and attack the Philistines and maybe get on Israel's good side once again. We don't know exactly why David wanted to go out to battle with the Philistines. But whatever it was, David shouldn't have been in the Philistine region in the first place. And thankfully, God actually protected David from that battle. David did want to go into that battle, but God said, no, you are not going to do that. And what happened was the Philistines rejected David. They're like, no, we're not having this Israelite go out to battle with us. And King Achish was like, what's wrong with him? And the Philistines were like, we hate him. And so Achish was like, David, just go home. You don't have to fight with us. So David ended up going home in a huff. He was quite irritated that he was not able to go out to war with the Philistines. But it's a good thing that he didn't. That was the battle where the Philistines were successful at killing Saul. Now, if David would have been the one to kill Saul, he never would have became the king of Israel, because the Israelites would have considered David to be a traitor who killed their king working for the Philistines. Even if David wouldn't have killed Saul, but would have been fighting with the Philistines, he still would have seemed like a traitor, and Israel would have completely rejected David. He never would have became the king of Israel. And even if David wanted to go out to battle with the Philistines so he could try to defect over to Israel, that still wouldn't have been a good idea. That battle ended up being terrible for Israel, and possibly David and his men would have died. The Philistines would have targeted David. So it's actually a very good thing that God prevented David from going out to battle with the Philistines against Israel. But even so, rumors couldn't stop that David had once lived in Philistia and helped the Philistines, and even possibly was thinking about helping them in battle. Those rumors could not stop because they were kind of true. And it's very possible that Israel had a negative view of David because of his previous history with the Philistines, which is why they come to David and they're like, you know what? We're going to let bygones be bygones. We're going to forgive you for your past of being with the Philistines because you are related to us. We are your bone and your flesh. And plus, on top of that, God did say you're going to be our king, so we might as well make you our king. So then in verse 3 of 1 Chronicles 11, going back to our passage for today, it says, all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and David made a covenant with them in Hebron before Yahweh. They anointed David king over Israel, according to Yahweh's word by Samuel. So now David finally, after several decades of waiting for God's promise, he becomes the king of all of Israel, not just the king of Judah. And now that David is king, he can't keep living in Hebron and make Hebron his capital city, because Hebron was in the middle to southern part of Judah, the tribe of Judah, which is all the way at the bottom of Israel anyway. David needed a more central location to live and to make his capital city. Jerusalem was a small city in the tribe of Benjamin at this time, but the Jebusites lived there. The tribe of Benjamin was never successful in getting the Jebusites out of Jerusalem and out of the tribe of Benjamin. That's talked about in Judges chapter 1, verse 21. It says, the Benjamites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem, and to this day the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. So now David is going to change that, because Jerusalem is a perfect location, which is very central in Israel, for making his capital city. So it says that David and all Israel went to Jerusalem, also called Jebus, and the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, were there. The inhabitants of Jebus said to David, you will not come in here. And the reason the Jebusites believed very strongly that they could be successful in battle against David was because they had been successful against the Israelites many times in the past. The Israelites were never successful in driving the Jebusites out. So the Jebusites are kind of cocky, and they see David coming with his army, and they're like, yeah, you're not getting in here. And they fight against David and lose. It says, nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion. The same is now David's city. And now here's the funniest part of this entire portion. Verse 6, it says, David had said, whoever strikes the Jebusites first shall be chief and captain. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went up first and was made chief. And the reason that's so funny is because it's clear in context when you read about David's relationship with Joab that he did not like Joab. On multiple occasions, David tried to get rid of Joab. And I think this is actually one of those occasions, because it's kind of insinuated, though it's not specifically stated, it is insinuated that Joab was already chief and commander of David's army. Because go to 2 Samuel 2, and you'll see this. Remember Abner, the commander of Ishbosheth? He was fighting against Joab, right? He considered Joab to be the commander of David's army, because in 2 Samuel 2, verse 14, this is what it says. Abner said to Joab, please let the young men arise and compete before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Abner recognized Joab as the commander of David's army because he talked as commander of his army to Joab, telling Joab to command the men to fight Abner's army. And Joab did it, and the men listened to Joab, which insinuates that Joab was already the commander of David's army. But on many occasions, David would get into fights with Joab and just did not like him. I think he considered Joab like a thorn in his flesh, basically, because he tried to get rid of Joab as commander on multiple occasions, and Joab just never went away. To like the day of David's death, Joab was just a thorn in his side. And even here, David is presenting this opportunity to all the men of Israel that if they can go in and have a defeat against the Jebusites, that he would give them the title of commander-in-chief and take that title away from Joab. But Joab was the one who did it. So Joab goes in, defeats the Jebusites, and was made chief because David was not able to go against his word. And so now David is stuck even more with Joab when he probably did not want to be and was probably trying to get rid of Joab even during these early days of David's reign. So I just find that absolutely hilarious that David was unable to back out of the promise that he made, and Joab was the one who actually completed the challenge that David laid out. That just tickles me pink. It's just so funny. So it says after this, David lived in the stronghold, and therefore they called it David's city. He built the city all around from Millo, even around, and Joab repaired the rest of the city. So David grew greater and greater, for Yahweh of armies was with him. And that's a very important key phrase, that the reason David grew great was because God was on his side. You know, we can't do anything without help from God. But one of the ways David grew great was actually by building up Jerusalem, which is still the most important city pretty much in the Middle East to this day. But David was the one who made Jerusalem great, with, of course, the help from God. Speaking of Joab, he's actually one of my favorite people in the Old Testament because he is such an anomaly to me. You know, just his character, he was like a man of war and battle, and that was what he was going to do. And I just find his personality very interesting. And of course, we're going to talk a lot more about Joab and David in the coming chapters of 1 Chronicles. But faithful listeners, tune in tomorrow for an episode from Philippians, because on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go through the New Testament. And then on Mondays and Wednesdays, we talk about the Old Testament here on the podcast. So tomorrow we'll be in the book of Philippians, and I hope you tune in. Now, if you're curious about anything else that this ministry does other than the podcast, please look in the description of this episode, and you will find everything else that my ministry and myself do, including the devotionals I've written, which some of them are free up on YouVersion, and you'll find a link for those, and then my YouTube channel as well. And I'm playing around with an idea of another YouTube video that I'm going to do very soon. So make sure to go over to YouTube now and subscribe so you do not miss all of the good YouTube videos that I'm going to be doing. All right, faithful listeners, have a lovely rest of your day. As always, happy listening, and God bless.